ICE protests are ramping up across metro Atlanta after another person was shot and killed by immigration officers in Minnesota. The recent deadly encounters involving ICE are also causing a heated debate inside Georgia's state capitol. Atlanta News First Niamani Watson is live in downtown Atlanta. And Niamani, there is a growing divide over immigration enforcement.
That's right. On one hand, you have Democratic lawmakers accusing ICE officers of overreach. And then on the other hand, you have Republican lawmakers pushing back and defending law enforcement. Drivers honk in support as protesters rally against ICE on an overpass above I-20.
We don't want to become the next Minnesota.
Co-organizer Christy Lenz with M-Town Women's Resistance is referring to the fatal shooting of Alex Preddy during a confrontation with ICE officers in Minneapolis last week. Just a few weeks prior, another person, Renee Good, was shot and killed by an immigration officer also in Minneapolis. Both incidents caught on camera. Lenz says ICE officers and the Trump administration are abusing constitutional rights.
They're killing people, and it's wrong, and they need to stop it, and we want our lawmakers to stand up for us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Over at the Georgia State Capitol, lawmakers clash over immigration enforcement and public safety. Some Democrats have proposed legislation limiting ICE operations in certain spaces like churches and schools.
They are targeting children, they're targeting families, they're targeting citizens, they're targeting everybody. Without being able to assert our rights, we simply don't have them.
Meanwhile, Republicans say law enforcement officers are being unfairly portrayed.
When you have people in positions like ours, in positions of leadership, that are, again, dehumanizing and demonizing a group of individuals. And when you create that type of environment, it leads to negative outcomes that are going to get people hurt.
Now, Democratic lawmakers plan to hold a protest tomorrow at the state capitol. Meanwhile, Republican leaders say they do not plan to propose any changes to state law during this legislative session. Reporting live in downtown Atlanta, I'm Niamani Watson, Atlanta News First.